Welcome, friends. Welcome to this special live conversation as part of our new series, which we're calling Reculture Live. And my name is Ian McKenzie. I am one of the co-founders of Reculture, a platform production studio, really a gathering place for how we might traverse these times. And of recent projects, of course, were The Village of Lovers, the 9-year odyssey that it was to make that film about the community in Portugal called Tamara. And many of you have now seen the film, and we're grateful for that, sent beautiful comments and feelings of inspiration and all the rest. And many of you are also gathering now on our school platform under Reculture, where we're doing our best to help bring all of your passion and questions and possibilities together so you can connect with each other as well as we can continue to share the insights and information we've gathered. As well, many of you may have tuned in to A Cry from the Future, which was our 5-day elemental journey, really inviting in many special guests and wisdom keepers, folks that have been attuned and tracking the shifts of the moment and offering their insights. And we're still unfolding from that endeavor, which took many months to put together, and as well as all the magic, that unfolded over those 5 days. So we're still catching our breath from that. But again, we've been really appreciative of all the folks that have sent such beautiful messages from the summit, been cracked open themselves in different ways or found their people. It's been really incredible. And so brings me to this moment, which is our special conversation, first of what we're calling Reculture Live. And this is a conversation with a friend who I've known now a number of years, and we'll get into that probably. But just as luck would have it, or synchronicity or magic, that he happened to release a short film called The Opening, which is a provocumentary, as he calls it. And I remember talking with our guest years ago, actually, when he was working on it. And it was just great timing that the film actually was released a few weeks before the summit. And so immediately I had this feeling of, what, let's invite Jon on to have a conversation about it. In this film, there are many of the guests that you saw in A Cry from the Future, as well as many more. And they're woven together in such a profound transmission that it felt, a must to bring him on and to speak about this film, The Opening. Now, as I tried to announce in the email notifications that you would have gotten, the film is about 20 or so minutes, and hopefully you've watched it beforehand, because we're not going to play the whole film right now. I will play a brief intro to the film, The Opening, just to give you a little flavor of it. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's okay. You'll still enjoy the conversation, and then you can watch it after. But for those who have seen it, then you'll really enjoy this. And so here we go. I'm going to cue up first few minutes of The Opening by filmmaker Jon Marro, and then we're going to invite him on and have a great discussion about it. So see you soon.
Everybody remembered that day differently. When it first appeared, most people froze. Many people fled, but others began to follow it. I'm telling you this tale, but it's not just mine to tell. It's part of something much, much bigger. Chapter 1. A Whole New World.
It happened before it happened, even before it actually was visible to the eye. Many of us sensed that there was literally a tear in the fabric of reality.
I lived in Brooklyn, and I lived in a little apartment.
When it happened, I was in Buenos Aires.
I was in a cab with one of my dearest friends.
I was in my very little small house in Romania. I was in a shoe store buying a pair of black Adidas.
I know exactly where I was. I was in bed.
I just remember thinking, oh, this is what I've been preparing for.
I could actually feel the earth splitting below my feet. It was, for me, the most important day of my life.
So I'm out in the garden, and I just have this feeling that comes over me of excitement and dread all at once. I feel it before I see it.
Then the cab stopped and everything stopped. But people started hopping out of their cars. And yeah, we were in a different world.
It felt like in that moment, all the boundaries dissolved.
You just know there will be before and after this. You just don't know much beyond that.
If you see it coming at you, if you see it chasing you, if you see it waiting for you, if you see it at all, you are blessed.
Fear, hope, longing, confusion, a real sense of being lost.
There was just this feeling of like, oh, it's over.
You know, it radically transformed my life. I still feel like I'm completely scarred from the experience.
And I began to see things that were invisible to some eyes, but not to mine.
My goodness. Bravo. If that didn't stir you into intrigue into watch the rest of the film, if you haven't yet, then yeah, please do. We'll include the link in the show notes after this, the opening by our guest, who I'm going to invite on now. And, you know, as we were just chatting a bit beforehand, I was asking, how should I introduce you? And, you know, because there's many things I could say about this fellow. And one is that, you know, depending on where you, what language you're using, or what code switching, let's say, there's a term for it, what realm he's operating in, you could call him an artist, a creative director, an author, and a soulful Renaissance man. But beyond that, he's a vision sower, and something that we're probably going to talk about very soon. So I'd love for you to help me welcome on Jon Marro. Welcome.
Ian, great to be here. Thank you so much for the invite and for being an integral part of the opening. Yeah, as you said, we talked about this a while, and you are in the credits. You were a producer helping me connect with some of the guests. So yeah, thanks so much.
Happy to just see it come to this fruition, which is part one of, I understand, a larger unfolding. So my first question to you is, now this film is I mean, maybe give away a bit of a punchline, but it's inspired by the pandemic, but doesn't talk about the pandemic directly. Now, my curiosity for you is, I think a question you asked the guests in the series is, where were you when, quote, it happened, when the crack appeared in the sky?
Yeah. So are you asking me that? Are you asking me where I was when the crack appeared? Yeah. I think for me, I mean, there's multiple places. I've seen it in multiple places, but the first time I saw it, I was in Lexington, Massachusetts. I had just graduated from college, and I wasn't quite sure, you know, I was all young and vibrant and thought I was going to go take on the world. And then this massive breach in my worldview happened. And, you know, everything slowed down, everything shut down. And I didn't know. It was basically as if my eyes and mind were seeing one thing, but my soul was seeing something else. You know, I kind of got the sense I was watching as people were covering it on television, that we were being shown one thing, and then I was certainly, my other senses, my sort of faculties that I hadn't yet cultivated, were seeing something else. So that kind of began my spiritual journey. And that moment, like for me, you know, not to undo the metaphor, but that was September 11th. Like September 11th literally was when that occurred. I was fresh out of college, like the summer right after I graduated. I was all like, I'm gonna go get a job and like take on the world. And then like the economy in essence shut down. And it was actually literally this first time I was watching the towers come down on television, and my mind's eye I literally saw this crack in the sky. And at the time, this did not make it into the first part of the opening, but I saw all these, what looked like maple seeds, like those helicopter seeds, like be streaming down, falling, you know, from this rift in the sky, like this otherworldly seeds were trying to be planted here. And it was such a surreal like schism. And it was before I'd ever done any psychedelics or plant medicine. And I didn't quite know what was going on, but like it felt like a psychic bludgeon, like just September 11th and seeing everything going on. And like my mind wasn't quite sure what to make of it, but I knew my life wouldn't be the same after that. And so that really kind of became, it was like a spiritual awakening at some sort, because suddenly multiple worlds were being presented to me at once. And ever since, I've been navigating between the imaginal, the mystical, the mundane, and using my art as a like kind of a lantern, like a hermit's lantern, to find my way through the darkness and the multiple narratives going on at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that image. I mean, I struck by how this, yeah, when something significant happens, when there's a collective unfolding of something significant, certainly 9/11 for many. Sometimes people can say, or most of the time, I think people can say, "Where were you?" Right? I mean, for me, I was on a tiny island, actually in Fiji. I happened to be actually on my way to Australia, and somebody came up to me, in this little hut, in a tiny, very tiny island, like a mile across. They're like, "Hey, have you heard the news?" I'm like, "What news? I'm on an island, like in the middle of nowhere." And they're like, "You got to come see the TV." And they had this TV that was, had rabbit ears and barely grainy, and then we saw the news, right? But there was this feeling too of like, whoa, this is a very significant happening. And of course, all the narratives that fly in afterwards of quote what it means. And it just strikes me as the power of art as a way of making meaning, or of holding open the possibility of some kind of revelatory pathway to emerge. Right. This is something Michael Meade, that you of course featured in your film as well. He's talked about this as the third way, this tension between opposites, when the I don't know what to call them, the over culture or the society or government says, oh, this is what it means, and maybe there's a reaction to that, which is like, no, this is what it means. But the ability to hold the tension right between the opposites means that the possibility might emerge of some other things that, by rushing too quickly to decide what it means, we could miss that. And so I think for your film, which now speaks to a certain crack in the sky, an opening of certainly a collective global initiation of sorts. I'm curious to know, how did that come to you in terms of that you felt the call of like, oh, this is, not only yours to do, but also how you wanted to bring it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so that vision, September 11th, was the first, I would say, kind of, as an artist, I've largely operated from my mind's eye of being able to see an image. And I was a trained illustrator and artist, so I could see an image, and mostly that image was two-dimensional, and I could see the composition and then be able to render it through arts, paint, colored pencil, however I did that digitally. But this was a different story, and stories seem to kind of well up from a different place, and there's no real one like linear. It doesn't all come in a linear form. There may be like bits and pieces here, and then I get to kind of craft and puzzle it. So that first seed was planted September 11th, and really, 20 plus years later, when COVID happened, I just remember feeling a similar like puncture in the collective. And it felt like, and this is how I describe it, with everything going on politically, environmentally, and virally, it felt like the fabric of the cosmos was tearing apart. We just couldn't see it. And then I asked, but what if we could? What if we all woke up one day and there was this giant hole in the sky, and if government couldn't control it and science couldn't explain it, like who or what would we look to for answers? And exactly what you were just saying about Michael Meade is everybody had some version of their experience. I've actually done a lot of, there was a time in my life where I was doing a lot of plant medicine. And one of my favorite parts about those ceremonies, in addition to the incredible, visions and healing and just perspective shifting, was that at the end, everyone would usually share an essence of their own experience. And to me, it was like, my friend Irene always says, it's like everyone has the same story, exactly the same and totally different. And so I think after those experiences, you can just get on a soul level the power of the collective dream. And I know in a lot of indigenous cultures, that's how they would start every morning, is around a fire or however, like sharing the visions they got from the underworld or dream time, and they actually use that to guide their culture. So when this happened, I thought, when the pandemic happened, I thought, it felt like we were getting this call, this sort of global call for like to step off the hamster wheel and enter some kind of like earthbound, earth-led like Vipassana. Like, here's our moment. And there was that liminal time where no one quite knew what was going on. And there was obviously reports of like the whether or not they were real or not, like the smoke in China cleared with factories sort of shutting down and everything. But I do feel like, and I can feel this sometimes on Christmas Day when the collective is just in home and not at the factories or at work, there's just I can feel Earth's stillness. And for that little bit of time, I could really feel the Earth coming back alive and our culture. Paul Kingsnorth, who I think you might have interviewed with, Charles, at once, Paul Kingsnorth says, and I love this line, he says, God created the earth and we created the world. And for so long, I personally have been trying to like figure out who I am in the world, in the marketplace, whether that's dharmically or otherwise. And I just felt the glitch. I felt this hiccup in the marketplace, in the world. And I just leaned into that. And it was the first time in my adult life. I happened to blessedly find myself on my friend's farm. I was on a regenerative farm when I literally walked in, was going to be there for a weekend. And that's when we got the shelter in place notice. So a weekend turned into 2 weeks, turned into 2 months, turned into 6 months. I got like this really beautiful like earth school while I was there and slowed down. And I actually took 6 weeks off. And then the first time in my adult life, didn't create anything. I just listened. I got my hands on the earth and just slowed way down and listened. And then this vision is what came through afterwards. And then certainly as I was slowing way down and, going out and tending to gardens in the field on this farm, I was listening to a lot of podcasts, a lot of the speakers that we sort of see who were all trying to sense make what was happening. And obviously I know you created the pandemic as the prism, which again, that's why I think you and I have a connection, is we're sort of seeing things from different angles. And I wanted to express a prismatic view of this, especially because, around whether it was the vaccine or the cause of COVID, there were so many disparate comments coming in. And it was just hard to kind of find, for me, it was hard to find my center of like, who do I listen to? How do I actually, and I could see my own habits of outsourcing to quote unquote experts or authorities or people who I thought might be wiser, more influential, more powerful. So I was really wrestling with that. And as an artist, a lot of times I don't even know how I feel about something until I make art about it. So this was my like just diving into the unknown and seeing what was made. And it made me ultimately, like it definitely, to endeavor and take on a vision. And I put that, there's a line in there towards the end that says, it's one thing to have a vision, it's another thing to follow it. And for me to actually not just have this vision and hold it, but to actually begin to engage with this film. And also, and then I'll give the mic back to you. It was so humbling because I had what I would feel like was a Steven Spielberg-sized vision with like an independent filmmaker's budget. And so like, how do I bring this multidimensional vision to life with what I have? And that was a message that came through after that 6 weeks of kind of like, just introspection. There was this little soul message that said, start where you are and start with what you have. And so I was like, okay, I got an iPhone, I got a farm, I got this dude named Braden, who's a friend of mine. He's also like this COVID refugee on the farm. And I'm going to invite him to, he's not an actor, but he was just willing. And he played the wanderer and storyteller. And we just made something. And that, rather than having all my resources and everything sort of needed to be able to craft with, life hands you lemons, make lemonade. When life hands you COVID, make COVID-aid. So that's what I did.
That's, thank you for sharing that. Make with what you have or where you at, be where you're at. I hear in that as well. And just for me too, I think it was late December of 2021. So there was already stirrings, I believe, in China of, some mysterious illness. And I wrote a piece actually, which for me captured the moment that, many had been feeling, I think, which was really the kind of unstoppable apocalypse, right? Like, and the piece I wrote, which I drew from a line from Martine Prachtel, the author and, Indigenous wisdom holder, but he says something like, if one was to fail, it was better to fail beautifully.
Love that. I love that.
It's just,
yeah.
And so for me, I was writing this piece, this essay was trying to express a sense of, it was kind of hopelessness around, does anything really matter because it's already too far gone, like the momentum of destruction and climate change, all of it. It was just the title I had was "It's Already Too Late," right? Reflections on the end of the decade, actually, because it was just still early days of the decade there, the year, and then 2 months later, COVID happened. So for me, I was like, whoa, what? It was definitely a kind of a wild card trickster move all of a sudden, that the one thing that could have, quote, had the world stop. And I wrote a piece later after that, which I'm still proud of the title. I mean, I guess I really love titles, but it was "The Days the Earth Stood Still."
Days, D-Z-E? D-A-Z-E?
Well, no, the days. Yeah, days is in, days of the week. The days the Earth stood still. Of course, a throwback to the sci-fi film.
Yeah.
But so for me, I was like, whoa, and I really tried to reflect on this too. Like, what does this mean? What could it mean? And the more that people said, well, this is what it means, right? The scientific medical establishment, this is what it means. The governments, this is what it means. Or even the alt, rabbit holers, this is what it means. Like, I was very nervous about ever truly, landing on one of these perspectives and saying, oh, this is what it means. And so, about a year later, I also kicked off the Pandemic as a Prism podcast series with my friend Zamir. And that was also a way of, I was talking to people who I respected or was intrigued by their perspectives, and just like, what do you think this is? Right. And it feels like that's some of the approach you brought to your guests. And you did it in a somewhat brilliant way of, there's this kind of continual Zoom conversation, it seems, is happening with all of those people all at once, which I suspect, right, of course, was not how it was technically. But the way that you present it is a, a really unique, interesting way. And I'd be curious to hear from you on that. Like, what was your process of, gathering the interviews, but then figuring out exactly how to stitch them together within a kind of, again, as a filmmaker, I appreciate a kind of sleight of hand there, to kind of create a seamless sense of, tapping into this collective, of insight.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And I was super inspired by Pandemic as a Prism. And I think all of that still holds up. It's like the Pandemic and the Prism, the opening are like sister projects, I think, kindred spirit projects. I think also, Zoom was, again, it was start where you are, start with what you have. Everybody was on Zoom, at the time. That was the mode of the moment, and still, semi is. So it felt like a no-brainer to use that. And then what I really did was I just reached out to people that were wisdom keepers that I was inspired by, that I felt had either a unique perspective, a deeper perspective. They'd seemed to wrestle with it. They'd seemed to be okay with having, being able to hold cognitive dissonance, or being able to hold, a longer vision around all this. And also had probably, whether it was around the pandemic or not, I just loved what they had to say. And it would be an honor to just meet with them and see if they wanted to be part of this buffet. So reached out, and mostly everybody said yes. That was the blessing. Francis Weller, who I love, I actually didn't hear from him, and then but he's really all about slowing way down. He calls it geologic time. So I actually wrote him a handwritten letter, and that's how I got him. So, start where you are, start with what you have. Use all the tactics, but then to put it together. You probably know this. They say in filmmaking, that there's, and this was aside from the narrative, the storyteller's narrative, this was unscripted, right? So, but they say when filmmaking, there's 3 films that are made. There's probably more, but there's 3 films that are made. There's the film that happens on the script, there's the film that happens while you're shooting, and then there's the film that happens while you're editing. And all 3 of those are going to be different depending upon circumstance, and just improvisation and magic and serendipity or breakdowns, all of the above. And so really what I did, I knew my job was largely just to interview people and just get them speaking on this thing. And then I had to go through and obviously, highlight all of find the sound bites, find the things that I can work with. And then, somehow weave it into this thing that mapped onto the larger storytelling narrative that I was telling as well. And it was just it was an alchemical process. I had a much longer, not a much longer version. The final version is about 27 minutes, but maybe like 22 minutes before the credits. And I probably had a 30-minute version that, I loved because I love hearing people speak philosophically and wax poetically. But I had some friends who were like, we should probably cut down on the, what you call pontification, cut down on the pontification for people for this first one. And I had a really good friend who's a creative ally, Colin Gill, who he did some of the motion graphics in this. I just really trust his artistic instincts. And he said, if this is going to be 3 parts, you can't tell the story over all 3 parts. You have to front load the story, like the exposition, the who, what, where, when, and why of like, what is this thing? What happened? You can share people's experiences over all 3 parts, but the story has to be really front loaded in part 1. So that was a really pivotal moment for me to just get in there and kind of like part 1 seems like the crisis or like the WTF, like there's a breach in the sky. What's going on? Part 2, I mean, again, I don't want to pretend like I know exactly what it is, but my sense is what I am calling it is darkness in a world of dawn. Darkness in a world of dawn, where you have to go through the threshold, where we have to go through the uncomfortable reckoning with the shadow, with the unconscious, with if this happens, it's not going to be all blissful. It's going to be, all the things that we haven't want to look at personally and collectively. And then part 3 is the like regenerative seeds that are sprouting from as the old world is kind of falling and composting. And as we see, Bayo talks about it, in the cracks. But that was another thing too, is for me, as I've been I've done client work for all sorts of, people in the music and entertainment industry, health and wellness industry, and then more largely, these little activists that have been post-activists, people who are doing more disruptive, left of center thinking. And I just found that there were people doing remarkable things that we would never see, that are just not getting the light of the day or get lost in the streaming or in the feed. And so it was a little bit of wanting to highlight and showcase the work of all these behind the scenes, like, earthbound angels, because all we're getting shown is the atrocities of the world. And I know we need to see those, but they're getting all the airtime, have all this sort of story. It's what sort of sells, what is it? What's that? There's like a news feed where if it's like, if there's blood, let it, I don't know, show it or something.
Oh, if it bleeds, it leads.
If it bleeds, it leads. There it is. If it bleeds, it leads. Exactly. So they say that the revolution will not be televised. And I was like, well, then what if television was revolutionized? And part of the sort of media is to actually show slow media, show these beautiful, bountiful, hopeful projects that I'm not gonna even say are necessarily gonna change or save the world. I mean, I think they're changing, but saving the world more just, I feel like how I look at it is the old system clearly has to collapse. So the people that are actually on the ground doing grassworks, beautiful work are already there anyways. They're already meeting people where we need to be for when the system collapses. And so I reached out to people that I thought had a firm, standing on the earth, and that had deep-rooted wisdom that could be, what would you call that? That could be, fruitful.
I think wayfinders are here.
Yeah, wayfinders is a great way. Wayfinders for like they're both like exemplifying what needs to happen and the way forward. And so, I look to them as people who are very humble, not pretending to have all the answers, but have a lot of questions and life-giving questions. And Rilke, the poet, said, live the questions, like live them long enough till sort of maybe one day in the future you'll live into an answer. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, a few things stirred for me there, which is, going back to now the focus of this film being this initial rupture, this crack in the sky, this happening, trying to come to some initial sense of meaning, or at least landing somewhere. And one thing that you do speak about in the film, or is named through the narrator, is the rupture in relationships, right? From this very scramble, right? For what does it mean? And not only what does it mean, but depending on what you believe, like where do you stand then, right, in this? And the significance of that is, in some ways, it's almost easy to forget, like depending on, quote, where you were on the side of, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, blah, blah, blah. But depending on where you were, the consequence of being on what side you were on, and how that rift ran right through families, right, coworkers, communities, and the measures that were instituted, right, some far more draconian than others, and yet at the same time, now that it kind of, for at least in the collective consciousness, it seems over, that the fact that the ruptures happened within very intimate relational communities. Like I've heard people say, again, like I lost friends, we haven't talked since. But even that, there's folks that'll say, well, the fact that this happened, and then even the friends that they continue with or family they continue with, now they know that if something like this was to happen again, what side would they be on, or how quickly they would throw under the bus, one side or the other. It's just, to me, it's not a small thing, actually, that the art of truly naming and then the need to repair, right, this undercurrent, rather than be like, oh, well, it's over, like, let's keep on, is just very dangerous, I think, because, right, in the sort of base level trust of foundation in relationship, for people to be able to say, like, okay, if things get wild, like, will you be with me, right, is sort of a fundamental question that I think was tested and broken for a lot of people, right, when all of a sudden it was like, oh, show your true colors, and then you're one of them, or you're that it was a profound kind of it's almost like, when some image I had in Pandemic as a prism is like lasers in a museum or something, right, like where you can't see the lasers unless you throw some kind of medium in there, and by that meaning like a security system. So you throw in some chalk or something, chalk dust, right, and all of a sudden all the lasers appear. And for me, it was a bit like that, like this happening was the chalk dust, right, in the ether, and then all of a sudden all these undercurrents were made visible, and then obviously we had to contend with them.
That's like a mystical Mission Impossible movie that I want to see. Yeah, I love that chalk dust and lasers. Yeah, I completely feel resonated, went through that as well, and I've often thought about, two things in this. One is, clearly there was the separation, and then there's people on both sides, we'll say, of the vaccine competition, that are still like doubling down on their being right about it, right? Like they're kind of like doubling down on that rather than trying to sort of work together. So I think that points to something larger. And I was looking at, what is the divisive thing, energy, archetypally even, like, is that the devil, or what is that evil energy that would actually separate and actually keep people so divided, And there's this parable, I think it's an African parable, and I've always loved it, where there's this little tiny village, kind of in the middle of nowhere, and then this character, this foreigner, walks through, and I picture her as this, it's clearly a trickster character, and walking through, looking like almost dressed in like Cirque du Soleil or like a Burning Man type attire, right? So one half of the body is like green and like has like a masculine side, and the other half is red. It has sort of a sensuous feminine side, and this figure walks right through this little tiny village, and everyone's like, what is this? They've never seen anything like it. It's so alien to them. And after he kind of passes through, people on the either side of the street kind of meet in the middle and like, did you see that figure wearing green? I was like, he wasn't wearing green, he was wearing red. You don't know what you're talking about. You always like, you always think you know what you're talking about. It was clearly wearing green, and it was a man. It wasn't wearing, it was not wearing green, it was red, and it was a female. And anyways, they just start bickering and fighting over what they sort of saw. And then, push comes to shove, comes to like slap, comes to whether it's just like killing, screaming, anything. And then you realize that it's the devil walking through, and he just sort of smiles, knowing his work was done, just to create that kind of division. And so I wonder, that's where I kind of go to. And then beyond that, I have to look at, I go to like whatever the Gaia is, or the earth archetype, this mother, this earth beneath all of our feet, that is somehow holding all of the disparities going on right now in the world. Somehow, like, with all the atrocities, thankfully, gracefully, we haven't, we're nearing that point, but we haven't cracked everything enough where life still can't kind of go on. And somehow some benevolent force is holding that. And then, even beyond that, what's holding the earth in place? What's this benevolent, I call it loving force, that's actually holding the earth? So something larger is somehow holding us. Thomas Berry, he's like an eco-psychologist. He says that space, or the cosmos, is Earth's ecosphere. right? Which I've always loved. Like we always think of our little ecosystems around here, and there's different things, but that cosmos is actually the ecosphere that Earth actually can thrive in. And I really, that is just one of those mind-blowing things that I love to think about, and also tried to give a peek at, with the cosmos peeking through the sky. And clearly, what I was wrestling with, even personally, was around this topic was just my own sense of right, wrong, and like how do I burst through my own like limited ceiling of beliefs or imagination or what I think is so. And these worldview changing moments, whether they've been a thing like 9/11, a thing like the pandemic, when you find out news of losing a loved one, or perhaps a plant medicine experience, or something like a profound dream. There's these moments that can happen, an accident, an illness, that can just put everything like acutely in focus, and everything else that might have been taking up your energy and attention just falls away. And so, if nothing else, to endeavor for me to follow a vision is to try to keep my eyes, attention on the muses, the imaginal realm, some other world, and maybe even system or realm of physics that seems to be making life possible and guiding it. Because if I look to culture, it's like keeping up with the Joneses, and I can no longer actually trust where they're taking me or us. So I'm actually looking the best I can through my imagination, through being in nature, like, hey, you seem to have it figured out. Because this is another thing I always say is, there doesn't seem to be a large collection of scientists that are trying to figure out, what? I wonder if like the heart would actually breathe air rather than the lungs. Maybe we should try to figure out if that would actually be more efficient, or that, that are trying to like, replicate or like how to change photosynthesis, or the fact that the Earth revolves around the sun in 365. They're not trying to say, what if we made it, 500 days instead of 365? There are some divinely granted physics that seems to keep life alive that we're not trying to mess with. We keep trying to fix man-made problems. And the things that we've created, it's that Einstein quote, you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. And I think that that's where I'm looking to, is what's a different kind of consciousness that isn't of my own making, that's trying to survive in the capitalist overculture, something that's actually granting life to all, and how can I let it guide me creatively and through words, action, speech, livelihood, etc.
Yeah, thanks a lot in there. I mean, just looping back briefly to the part of the story of the devil walking through town, right, and showing two sides and then sowing division. I mean, that to me feels like social media, right?
Yeah.
If the devil is social media, seems to be the case, because the more that we hook into these sort of deliberately polarizing, and I'm not saying that Zuckerberg's sitting there like cackling, but it's like really unwilling to reconcile with the consequence of technology that accesses dopamine, gets us on these rapid cycling patterns of consumption and distraction, and really perpetuating outrage, right? That everything is all designed based on a model of mining attention, and from this inherent value system, right, it's going to keep encroaching upon the capacity to be with, to recognize bigger picture or common ground with another, right? Like it just feels like it's gotten far worse in terms of this as a skill, right? And certainly what I found with the Pandemic is a Prism series, the story that came up, I think it was Amir might have brought it initially, which was again the story of the elephant, right? And then the blind men. The blind men are kind of all feeling into this creature, and some holding the trunk, and he's saying, well, this is clearly what it is. It's kind of like long cylindrical beast, and the other's holding on to the tail. It's like, no, it's fluffy and got some fur. And they could fight about it, or they could recognize, oh, they're all having piece of that tapestry. And so this is so much of what I see with even what's going on today with like heavily polarized positions around major issues, is that really the seeds of and the blind spots of one side are contained within the other. And at the same time, I'm not saying therefore it's all good, man. Everybody's valid. Everybody, I'm not quite saying that either, because that's also a very difficult place to navigate when everybody's truth is valid. I mean, everybody can have experiences that are true for them, but ultimately we need to be able to arrive again at some kind of collective sense making or collective decision making. And for me, what this perpetuated as well, this opening, was essentially showing how little of a we there actually is, right? And again, this is something I've touched on, in a number of different formats or conversations, but the sense that, people that are held together by a fiction called a nation state.
Sure.
Right. And if we just, shift that for a second too, and be able to hold that of like, that a nation state is a story that people collectively agree to participate in, which is very little, often, at least, with a lot of the lines drawn on the map now, have very little to do with the actual ecosystems that these lines, delineate. And it make a lot more sense to have bioregional identities, which is, of course, what indigenous is and has been. But in a sense, so the fiction of a we is made apparent in these kinds of moments when there's a high degree of fragmentation and polarization. And then it's like nobody can agree, or at least people in camp, right, into these different positions, and then, are able to point the finger and say, you're the problem. And it's just tragic, obviously, because, we're all the same organism. Called humanity, on the organism of the earth. And so much of the work that I've been trying to do, of course, in the film with Tamara, and why I think Tamara and the Village of Lovers ultimately was really trying to offer a sense of how to come back to coherence with people, loving, solidarity, trust, regenerating trust. Like, here's a little microcell of humanity that was able to do that in a meaningful way, in the southern Portugal, made largely by Germans. And yet for me, that was what we were trying to hold aloft again to the greater global community of like, look, if it's possible to regenerate trust here in this little cell, might this cell be able to kickstart capacity of remembering again, remembering and coming into a coherence? Because that's really what the earth needs of us, right? Is to stop being incoherent with each other and actually get to the work, like Charles Eisenstein says, of healing the damage that's been done. Like, ultimately, that's what the earth is crying for, I believe. And, you're nodding your head a bit. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you on this.
No, I mean, exactly. And I think that you were just speaking, that's imaginal cells coming together, right? That it starts with one kind of having this vision. And then they form clusters until they sort of, my little understanding of imaginal cells is like, there's one visionary cell that's like, okay, we're doing butterfly now, from this sort of slothful, chubby little, consumptive caterpillar, we're going to somehow fly this thing, and the imaginal cell vibrates with such this irresistible vision that other cells at first, obviously attack it because they don't recognize it as one of it, but then then they get close to it, it's irresistible. They sort of almost melt into it and then vibrate along the same thing. And so there's clusters, but all the while, there's like this civil war going on, right? Of probably pointing fingers. Are like, that's wrong, that's wrong. They're not trusting where we're headed. I mean, Wendell Berry asks, what are humans for? And I just don't think we have a collective understanding of that. But then little by little, these clusters find other clusters, and then they actually create something new. But scientists have put up microphones to chrysalises or cocoons in that process. And there's like this shrill shrieking going on. It's like a terror, of like this dissolving into this liquid living goo, and then like a phoenix rising cell by cell, kind of putting itself back together into this remarkably new form. That, I think, what I also love, to your point about healing, and this, obviously we all know the butterfly as a symbol and archetype of transformation, but I don't think it's spoken of, about enough, where it then becomes a pollinator. It doesn't just like that, like a butterfly and then it's done. It actually then pollinates and sort of helps other things grow, which I think is beautiful. And I think is also the work that, what you were just speaking to, is being asked of each of us. But I do think there's something, to go back to the film here, I have I've had a long time friendship just by virtue of working with him, Jason Mraz, who's a songwriter and musician. And, I started working with him when he was still playing like coffee shops. And then he kind of took off, and I got to go along for his little creative, successful ride and journey. And there's always this song that I've always loved of his that he's never released, called We Are Connected. Or We're All Connected, or it's also called Dialed In. And he let me use that for the end credits of the song, and he even actually modified it a bit to kind of include some symbology and even the term opening. And I think the end credits of the film were actually my favorite because it's like a shout out to everybody who contributed, but also that song is this really anthem for, I think, what's happening. And he even actually uses a cocoon metaphor in there as well. So for those of you who haven't watched or want to watch again, like you can listen to that song, and even that feels like a film within the film as well. But I think, and Ian, this is why I've always been knocking on your door and always wanting to work with you, is I just feel like like-minded people are sort of finding each other and saying, all right, rather than doing our own little like echo chambered boxes and projects, how can we actually harness the collective and bring our skills towards something, towards that more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. Yeah,
I love that. The butterfly becomes a pollinator.
Yeah.
And that's what we called our film tour as well, the pollinating the possible. That was the initial tour we had with the film, the Village of Lovers, as we brought it around to communities. And in terms of this film, I'm curious, what is your ambition with it's up on Vimeo now, folks can watch it. Some folks have seen it. We're going to send it, or I'll put it again in the show notes. But what's your highest joy picture, to use a Tim Aaron phrase as well?
So I have and you and I talked about this on a separate thing, but so that September 11th moment for me, when I saw this hole in the sky and these sort of seeds, sort of maple seeds helicoptering down, I felt really taken by a vision, this cinematic vision of really showing, as Bill Plotkin from Animus Valley would say, like the descent into soul. And showing how to journey into our own souls and our own gifts, and then bring them back to heal the collective. So the opening for me, I'm going to do parts 2 and hopefully 3. And my larger vision is to, I'd love to have it. Large vision would be an episodic series, an ongoing thing. I'd love to create a mystical PBS, like a production studio that brings mythic animate tales to life. That we could be referencing, and also seeing a different way to live. The way Sesame Street, the children's television workshop, created Sesame Street, and it brought psychologists, child psychologists, and artists, and teachers, and educators, and philosophers all together for the common good of actually, planting, basically showing children what's possible and how to actually learn in the culture. And so if television can do that rather than be this divisive thing, I'm looking at how could, what could, there's a great episode actually of Your Undivided Attention, a little podcast that asks, what could AI learn from Sesame Street? And I just love this concept. And so how could we actually program technology, if we're all on screens or whatever, for this? But also, I think we really do need to get our hands back in the dirt and back in earth and back around each other. So my greatest vision is actually to create a community that's based in storytelling, in myth, but it gives that's why I'm calling it a provocumentary. It wants to give real-time advice on how to actually save this world. I always like to say that we have the Harry Potters of the world. We have these, heroes' journeys, or these vampire or zombie apocalypses, or even Game of Thrones, which I loved up until the last season. Like these archetypal stories, but they're all saving some fantastical world while this world is burning. So my vision is like, how do you tell a story? That's actually what the opening is asking. The second part is, how do you tell a story that's not just yours to tell, right? And then the answer that came back was, you tell it together. So how do I would love to create a mythic story that has an arc, Game of Thrones like, where everyone's a protagonist, archetypally working out their own wrestling with their own shadows and light. And then people are bringing back real world insights, visions, treasures to heal the collective, not just be sort of keeping it in this endless loop of fantasy or this journey. Even, I think I've heard Bill Plotkin speak about the hero's journey actually being adolescent, in the sense that, the hero comes back a victor. I love it. I think it's actually great. I think it's just incomplete. You kind of bring it back and then it's done, like you're sort of victorious, rather than we sort of know there's this lifelong kind of becoming. And I think that to actually bring back a treasure is sort of make sure it's life-giving for the larger culture and for the earth and perhaps even the cosmos, rather than just like you're heroic and it's like, it makes your world bigger and better. Like it actually has to contain something larger, which I think speaks to what you were saying about the we. How do we create that? And I don't know, aside from I know we have to create it together. So I'm just looking to align with other visionaries like yourself and people probably on this call to share. So the opening wants to be, an ongoing series and an ongoing investigation, cinematic and otherwise, but it's really a call to visionaries. It's a call to people to say, hey, like Helena Troy style, like bring your projects to life. Like the ship, the ship that lost, what is it? The woman who launched 1,000 ships. Like
the face that launched 1,000 ships.
The face that launched 1,000 ships, right? Like this wants to be, I'm not pretending the opening is going to be that, but I think that to stare into that, I hope you would stare into the possibility of a project or a vision, something that's in your soul that maybe you've been a little scared to bring forth. And I think find the love of the world, the love of life itself, the things you love about this earth, love about existence, and offer it up to that. See if you can actually use your devotion creatively or otherwise. It doesn't have to be a film. It can be however you express yourself and come alive. As Joseph Campbell says, like we need people to be coming alive. So that's really what it is. And I have a Patreon page where you can follow along my creative journey. I've got other stories as well. You can follow me on Instagram. There's the patreon.com. But really the Patreon also, what I'm going to be doing is doing a once a week, what I call integrity for your imagination. And integrity for your imagination is a study hall essentially for creatives who might have a project that they're going on. And I missed this most from art school. What I loved about going to art school is we had a collective, a cohort of people who would always be sharing and giving critiques and feedback back on each other's work. So you can bring your own project. It could be writing, it could be art, it could be music, song, or an enterprise, a nonprofit you're starting. And if you're stuck or stopped, you can bring that to the collective. And there's almost like this communal think tank where people can share, well, what about this? Or I know a person here, or have you listened to this podcast? And it's just a resource that can actually help you realize what wants to come through you.
Beautiful. Creator's cocoon.
Exactly. Creator's cocoon. I'll use that.
Please do. I'm open source. So I think I might find that feels like close to our completion here in our conversation today for the opening. Just a note in the comments too, we heard from commenter saying, I cried listening to the end song and tried to find it on Spotify. Is that song on Spotify or somewhere else?
Not. He's never released it. I've got to tell him to like, hey, we're getting lots of comments. And I think it's just a matter of him being between albums, or I could say I'll talk to him. Next time I'll talk to him and say, hey, we're getting a lot of people. Like, let's release it.
That's it.
So
yeah, tears are flowing. It's hitting the right note. So once again, Jon, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, Reculture Live. Thank you for all the effort. I know it takes a long time typically to work. I mean, even a short film, I'm sure, it's taken a number of years, a number of diligent effort, a lot of times in the edit room and the creative altar, so again, thank you for the willingness to do that and for releasing it to the world. And folks are welcome to go see it. I mean, you can Google just the opening on Vimeo, and I can put it in the show notes as well and follow up. For folks who want to connect now as well with what's next for us at Reculture, including the Village of Lovers film. Now, we get a lot of questions too from folks who are asking, like, how do I see the film now? And I mean, you can, but it's part of a course actually now online, because what we're building to is another series of talks in the fall. And this will be the kind of series 2 and the completion really of what we opened here in the spring or in the late winter, which will then also coincide with the film being now widely available and then perpetually available after that to continue pollinating and inspiring others as it will. So, Jon, I hope we see you around that time as well. And on your journey too, blessings on part 2, however long that may take. But thanks to everyone who also tuned in, and onward we go.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ian.